on this. Stephen Yates at Yates DCIA. He's at the DC International Advisory. And of course, this is his wheelhouse, having previously advised former VP Dick Cheney. Stephen joins us now for the first time, I may add, by Skype. So now, in addition to listeners across the country hearing him, people who are watching on Pluto TV and elsewhere through the live stream can see him as well. Stephen, so good to see you.
Thanks very much. We'll see whether the video helps or hurts.
I'm sure it helps because now everyone can see the kind face that always goes with the expert voice. Is this Pompeo setting China up, Hong Kong up for further sanctions? I mean, I'm trying to look at the 30,000 foot view here, because when I first saw this statement, I thought, really, Hong Kong isn't really considered autonomous from China anymore? What is the purpose of Pompeo making this statement?
Well, it's a very, very difficult situation, and I know it's a decision that hasn't been easy for the Secretary of State, and frankly, for a lot of us that have been vested in the freedom movement and democratization efforts in Hong Kong, because it's a little bit of a two-edged sword. You start saying that it's one country, one system. The Communist Party has erased Hong Kong's special status and autonomy. You worry about hurting the people. And one thing I hope the world has learned is that a very large majority of the Hong Kong people actually want their freedom, want their autonomy, and they're willing to risk everything in order to try to make that clear. And so this has not been an easy thing to do. I think you had it right in the lead-in that this is Secretary Pompeo on behalf of President Trump, who should be speaking about this any minute, setting them up for taking stronger actions with regard to Beijing. Ultimately, there are some things that should be done that are targeted on Hong Kong. There are contracting firms that have been doing quote unquote security work. I don't know if air quotes can come through the radio. And they've been basically the dark hand of the Communist Party, imposing violence on innocent people in Hong Kong that far surpass anything that Americans can really conceive of. So I think sanctions are coming. I think they should be coming towards the leaders of China, not just the people who are doing the dirty deeds in Hong Kong. That's a fundamental change. I hope people can appreciate how big of a change this is. We've had 50 years of a consistent policy in the United States government. I have not been a fan of that consistency. I don't think any policy should live for 50 years. So President Trump, I think, deserves a lot of credit for even being willing to consider the change. But this isn't going to be easy. The Chinese are going to fight back. And we've been far too open to them for too long, letting them play on our turf. I think this is Pompeo and the president pushing this battle of ideas and battle for freedom back into their turf.
It seems that because the mantra has always been the one country, two systems. And ever since, for those who might not know, ever since the British transferred, I guess, for the lack of a better way to say it, jurisdiction to China, that mantra that has always been kind of unofficial, official policy. Was there ever the expectation, not just from this administration, but from really just the United States, no matter the administration, that there could be the potential for Hong Kong, for China to just suddenly change its mind and say, no, we really kind of want one system? And was there ever any preparation for that day happening, which in that day is now?
Well, I mean, I've spent my years in government, and there's a lot of good people in government. The one thing I have never found is long-term strategic thinking. Everything is always sort of reactionary and a cycle by cycle, whether it's news cycle or election cycle. And in some ways, that's frustrating, but also a beauty in the American process. On the other hand, a lot of the governments involved in this are not prisoner to that same cycle. And I think when Margaret Thatcher, not a wilting lily when it came to international policy, made probably the worst deal of her career on the reversion of sovereignty of Hong Kong, there was an expectation of two things. One, there was a so-called international community. We now know that I think that is technically called horse hockey. The other assumption is that the China we would be dealing with 50 years from the time of this agreement was going to be a different place. We had the so-called end of history with the end of the Cold War that made people optimistic that even China would change, and maybe we wouldn't have a communist government that is going to be melding Hong Kong into a one China framework. Just shows that we can really not know very much about the future. And it also shows, I think, a very tragic durability and stickiness to these authoritarian regimes that need to be assumed into our policy.
China has benefited so greatly from that economic freedom that Hong Kong has enjoyed, and of course, other freedoms that have gone along with that. Why, and I know it's not sudden because this has been ongoing for quite some time, but why now? Why have they decided now's the time that they're going to try to not really pass resolutions, but rubber stamp these edicts where they're going to exert control over Hong Kong?
No, I think it's actually the most important question of our time. And it's one I would wager there are some total of 0 China experts who can answer it, because the change came in China. There is no rational explanation for why the Communist Party leadership of China under Xi Jinping needed to do so many bad things so quickly in recent years. It's just in recent years, to recap, they put over 1 million Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps. They've, of course, put their foot on the neck of the people of Hong Kong. They threatened democratic elections in Taiwan. They've come after us on our campuses. They've threatened Canadians who are just doing aid in China with indefinite incarceration. They bully Australians. And so there's something that's been unleashed by Xi Jinping that none of the establishment or academic experts could ever predict, and they can't even explain it. So President Trump and U.S. government and our allies have to just deal with what we see. And I think it's leading to a more sober and firm policy, hopefully one where we're much less dependent on China.
Yeah, and I hope that in addition to setting this up for possible sanctions, that we continue to do whatever we can to incentivize as opposed to demand that these manufacturers move and relocate back here to the United States. And of course, our domestic tax policy, as we talked about last week, that's going to go so far into making that a reality. So what does that look like? Let's just, for the sake of argument, assume that, okay, that we're going to see, because these sanctions are also going to affect Hong Kong, with whom the United States has had a great relationship. Mike Pompeo says that the people stand with Hong Kong, but they're going to be hit by this as well. How is this going to unfold?
My guess is it's going to go step by step, that the U.S. Treasury Department and the others on the economic team will begin working with what I would consider to be the easy targets. Number one, are there overseas holdings by the Communist Party leadership or their immediate family members? People might remember the Huawei case. It's being tried in Canada, and one of the relatives of a very high-ranking communist leader is supposed to get extradited to the United States for violating Iran sanctions. Well, we should be wrapping up, in law enforcement speak, all of the funds and the personages of the communist leadership and their princeling relatives. We have no-show jobs in Wall Street that are occupied by high-ranking family members of communist cadre. That's got to get exposed, and that's got to end. And when we look at our immigration policy, whether it's education or other employment, we have national security reasons, but also issues of principle and reciprocity that needs to be called into question. I think this is where we begin. I expect the president will say something about the education visas. Yes. I expect he'll say something about the people and companies that are involved in human rights abuses in Hong Kong or elsewhere. But I think this is going to have to be an ongoing, evolving tool set where we try things, see how they work, and then amp them up or change direction as required. The Chinese have been preparing and implementing their strategy the whole time we've had our head in the sand. So we're catching up on learning what we can do effectively to them.
Yeah, and hopefully we can get around that learning curve quickly. Last question for you. We're speaking with Stephen Yates at Yates DCIA with the DC International Advisory. Is there, and this is going to sound incredibly naive but I'm still curious. Is there any kind of chance that there is a change of heart? And again, that assumes a lot with the Communist Party of China. I can't imagine, yes, they're communists, but they also are, I think for themselves, they like wealth and they like success and they like progression in economic matters and in stature and everything else. It's insane to me that they would want to shoot themselves in the foot by exerting this sort of destructive policy over Hong Kong. Is there a chance that this policy could reverse and they could at least go back to the one state, two systems belief, or has that last exit on the highway been passed?
I fear it's been passed, but I know some people who are very, very dedicated to the cause in Hong Kong. They're committed to staying. They're committed to doing whatever they need to. They're not asking us to send American troops or other kinds of foreign intervention. They're just asking that they not stand alone, that we at least pay attention and offer acknowledgement and support for what they're trying to do. And they're asking for help for us to put pressure on the Chinese leadership. I think the one thing that these authoritarians can understand is when the pincers get close to them, their accounts and their families. And I hope that Team Trump is finding a way to put leverage where it needs to be. And that's the only way that the Beijing calculus will change. They're not going to have a change of heart and rediscover a newfound respect for human dignity. They just don't have that. They might be surprised at how durable the people of Hong Kong are. They are Chinese. They are part of the People's Republic of China by sovereignty, but they're very committed to their freedom. And for all we know, we could have another sort of Cold War experience where Eastern Europe changed in a moment. Maybe the people of Hong Kong are that canary in the coal mine that begins to tip this the other way inside China.
That's going to be something to see. It's amazing what just a taste of freedom will do and how it transforms and revolutionizes. And I know we'll be talking to you again about this because a lot more is going to unfold, I'm sure, even after the president speaks. Stephen Yates, always a pleasure. It's so good to see you. Hopefully you can join us again by Skype. But I know most of the time you're on the road to these places that you join us by phone to talk about. So we appreciate your time. Thank you.